Hello again. Welcome to our study. Explain this, please. This is the 42nd verse that we're going to try to unpack. Well, what does it say here? Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. What in the world is that supposed to be? Well, I'm glad you asked because this is taken from the 5th chapter of the book of Daniel, which just happens to be my favorite Old Testament book. So let's figure out what Mene, Tekel, Upharsin means. A little history very quickly. The Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar will basically rule the world for quite a period of time, and then after the Babylonians, then there's going to come the Medo-Persians. The Medes and the Persians will co-reign and they'll overthrow the Babylonians. Well, after them is going to come the Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great, and then after him is going to come the Roman Empire. So those are the four basic world kingdoms. Now, Babylon is what we're concerned with right now because Babylon and the leader of Babylon, one Belshazzar, is a young upstart who decides to have a lot of fun with a bunch of women and a bunch of booze and a bunch of partying. And so they have what I term the Feast of Fools. It doesn't go very well. Now, Babylon is a wicked, vile, bloodletting nation. And so God has given them time to repent, given them time to straighten their act out, if you will. And we're going to see they didn't. Jumping to Daniel chapter 5 and verse 1, Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast to the thousands of his hand and drank wine before the thousands. Now, visualize this as one great big party with the wine is flowing and all sorts of crazy things going on, as you can imagine. Jumping down to verse 4, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, wood, and stone. In other words, they're pagan gods. Now, all of a sudden, in the same hour, verse 5, now in the same hour came forth the fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall in the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. All right, so the party is in full sway, and all of a sudden there's this huge hand that writes on the wall. That's where we get the term. The handwriting is on the wall. So what did he see? Well, that's what he saw. Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Well, okay, the soothsayers, the Chaldeans, and all those guys run to see exactly what it means and what it says and to try to understand it, and they can't. Well, eventually, the panic gets wider and wider, and the king is scared to death. He can't figure out what's going on, and so somebody says, I think there's a guy by the name of Daniel. He might be able to figure this out. So they call Daniel, and he comes in. Well, Daniel gives the interpretation of it. Now, we read this in verse 26, that same chapter. He said, this is the interpretation of the thing, Mene. And here's the definition. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you're weighed in the balances. You're found wanting. In other words, you have been weighed. You've been judged, if you will, and your kingdom is worthless. And then finally, verse 28, Perez, or Upharsin, if you will, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So to sum all that up, what he's saying, God has numbered your kingdom. He's numbered the days. Your days are up. He's finished it. You've been found weighed in the balances. You've been judged. God has watched you and found out if you're worth anything, and you're not worth anything. And oh, by the way, in verse number 28, he says, your kingdom is divided. In other words, they're going to overthrow the Babylonians, and they do. The Medes and the Persians will overtake the Babylonians, and they will rule from Babylon for another 200 years themselves. So, how do we look at this as far as we're concerned? You have to wonder many times how I look at our nation and the 6 o'clock news. I wonder just how long God is going to allow America to continue in the position that she is. She flaunts and she practices evil, all sorts of evil. And I'm wondering just how long it's going to be before God sends a writing on the wall and says, okay, that's up. You're up. It's over. Your kingdom is taken from you. Well, that's the meaning of Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. So there's a lot in that chapter that we've run over very quickly. Daniel chapter 5 is where you will see it. Also on our channel, we have a study in the book of Daniel, and also in the prophetic studies, we go through this in greater detail. So till we do it again, we'll see you on the flip side.